Hello, brain shakers. Welcome to today's episode where we're going to be looking at contraception, which is also referred to as a family planning methods. Now, these are methods that are put in place to try and avoid a pregnancy. Now, I must also be quick to make mention that in as much as we will be understanding how we can prevent pregnancy, these sessions will also help us to understand which ones are your fertile days and which ones are your safer days that you can go ahead and have sexual intercourse and pregnancy is not going to occur. So these methods that we're definitely going to be looking at in more detail one by one will need you to have a brief understanding of the menstrual cycle. Now, I have done a number of videos in relation to the menstrual cycle, and I have looked at the menstrual cycle as well in more detail. So I'm going to attach a link to that video as well so you can delve in and understand what happens during the menstrual cycle. But because these methods rely so much on the menstrual cycle, because that is what is going to be altered to either prevent pregnancy from occurring or allow pregnancy to then happen. A quick recap of that menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle itself has a number of days. It means that you have to understand how long your menstrual cycle is. If you have a 28-day cycle, that is the most average days that you would be considering for a cycle, between 26 to about 32 days. Some have a shorter period that is less than 26 days. Some have a longer period that is more than 32 days. You may have a 35-day cycle. So you need to understand how long your cycle is then. But how do you then know that your cycle is this long? So the first day of counting is the first day of bleeding. It means that is your first day for that particular cycle. And so you have to look and count until your next period or until your next first day for a next period. It means that will then give you a duration of how long your cycle is. So this will only be possible if you are going to look at your cycles for not less than 6 to about 12 cycles. That means 6 months to about 12 months. You have to consistently follow your cycles and look at your cycles so you can have an average of all the cycles that you have already had. Now, when you're looking at the menstrual cycle, there are a number of phases that we're obviously going to be discussing and talking about. Now, the first one is going to be obviously the menstruation period, which is the period when there is actual bleeding, when the stratum functionalis or the layer that is on top of the endometrium there is shaved off and then comes out as the bleeding that you normally see when you're having that period. So that may last from about 3 to about 7 days. For some people, it takes just a shorter period of time, and then others will take a little bit of a longer period of a time as well. And then from there, then that stratum functionalis, which was shaved off, will need to then regenerate and be prepared again. So the uterus now endeavors to prepare itself for another chance of a pregnancy if pregnancy then does happen. But then if that doesn't happen again, it will be shaved off in the next menstrual period. So the regenerative and the proliferative phase is usually the longest part of the menstrual cycle, and this is the part that is obviously responsible for making that difference in the cycles, where you have some cycles shorter and some cycles a little bit longer than the others. It is because of the regenerative and the proliferative phase. Now, this is the phase that is controlled or well controlled by the follicle stimulating hormone, which is a hormone that is coming from the pituitary gland, that is playing a key role in making sure that at the same time that the uterus is making and preparing itself for pregnancy, then the follicles as well in the ovaries are developing, getting ready to come up and be fertilized in the fertilization region. Now, once you have finished up with the follicular or proliferative phase, then you get to a stage where you have the ovulatory stage. Now, the ovulatory stage, which oftentimes happens around day 12 to around day 16, depending on the duration or the length of your cycle. If you have an average 28-day cycle, we say that ovulation is most likely going to happen on day 14. So the ovulatory phase is just where the egg now, or the female ovum, is going to then be released in readiness for fertilization by the sperm. And once that ovulation has happened, it means that the phase that follows after is the post-ovulatory phase, which is also going to be referred to as the luteal phase, because there is a high amount now of the luteinizing hormone on in that period, and then that takes you to the secretory phase, where now you have all these secretions coming into place, making all the glands tortuous, making all the glands now solid, and they are ready to produce everything in order for a pregnancy to be allowed to continue to term. If fertilization did occur, then from that, if fertilization has not occurred, then it means that there's going to be a collapse or a fall in the levels of those hormones, that is the progesterone and the estrogen, because the part that actually released the egg, which was the corpus luteum, then now degenerates and then goes into a stage that we call the corpus albicans, and it's no longer producing that amount of progesterone and estrogen. So there will be a drop in the amount of those hormones, then causing bleeding to then begin, and then you enter into another phase, which is going to be the menstruation phase, and then that again gives you another cycle. So it means that the day prior to your next menstrual cycle, or prior to your first day of your cycle, is the last day of the previous cycle. So it is very easy for you to then determine the duration or the length of your menstrual cycle by looking at your first day when you had your bleeding to a day before your next bleed. Then that is going to give you an average number of days of your cycle. So you need to understand your cycle, whether you're having shorter cycles or you're having longer cycles, because some of these methods that are going to be discussed within these sessions that we're going to be having are going to be relying entirely on the duration of your cycle, because you need to do certain calculations to try and evaluate when exactly ovulation is most likely to happen. But in a normal 28-day cycle, we say that ovulation is going to happen around day 14, and day 14, it means that it is 14 days to your next menstruation period, that is towards the end of your cycle or before your next cycle. So it is important that you have that at the back of your mind before we look at all these other methods, because the menstrual cycle is the cycle that is then altered in order to favor a pregnancy or to prevent a pregnancy. So we're going to be going into more detail to look at all these other methods, that is looking at the natural family planning methods, where we'll be looking at the fertility awareness methods. We'll look at the other methods such as lactation or amenorrhea, coitus interruptus, abstinence as well being mentioned under that category. And then we'll look at the hormonal methods, from the orals to the injectables to the implants to the long-acting and reversible contraception. And then we'll look at what we would be terming as permanent methods or sterilization methods, such as the bilateral tubal ligation and the vasectomies of this board. So if you are not yet following, what are you waiting for? You're missing on a lot of important and amazing stuff coming your way. Now, if you found this particular video helpful in looking at these methods that we're going to be discussing about, and also in a brief recap of the menstrual cycle, don't hesitate to give it a like, a thumbs up, and share the video as much as possible. And if you're not yet following, please head on and follow, and I will see you in the next one.